Hi everyone, Mrs. Below here. In this video I'm going to be going over your modern genetics notes on pedigrees. Before we get started with that, please make sure that you check your homework against the Intro to Pedigrees video worksheet. This information is really important moving forward here in our notes. So a pedigree is basically like a family tree. So it's going to show us how a trait is inherited over many generations. And that trait could be, like in the homework, it talked about freckles. It could be some type of genetic disease like hemophilia or color blindness, any type of trait. The Roman numerals off to the side here, this will tell you the generation, okay? This helps us with identifying who is who in the pedigree. So, for example, Roman numeral 1-1 would be this person here. Roman numeral 2-3 would be this person here. So we use the Roman numeral first, dash, and then whatever number that person is in the pedigree. So usually we're just going to stick with these symbols here. The circles represent females, squares represent males. Sometimes you may see a diamond for an unknown sex if they didn't have children or anything like that. These ones are pretty rare. You won't see them too much on the pedigrees we're going to use. You can also have half shaded. So you can have half shaded like this one right here, number 4. And this means that they are a carrier. They're heterozygous. They are carrying a recessive trait, but they are unaffected. So for this particular pedigree, just because I'm seeing a carrier, that means that the trait itself must be recessive. Because you're seeing someone that is carrying the trait, but they don't actually display the trait themselves. So that must mean that this trait is recessive. So anybody who has the trait, they must be recessive, okay? And everyone who's completely unshaded, they must be homozygous dominant because they're not carrying the recessive trait at all and they don't have that trait. So just keep that in mind moving forward. If you see something that's half shaded, that means that person's carrying the trait, but they're not displaying it themselves. So then the trait itself must be a recessive trait. Here's an example of a royal family that had hemophilia. So Queen Victoria of England, right here, she inherited a hemophilia. So she ended up having a mutation for hemophilia A. So she's a carrier. She didn't know that she was carrying the trait. Hemophilia is recessive. Okay, so she is carrying it. So she's probably, if we're using the letter H, she's probably capital H, lowercase h. And the only way to have the recessive trait is to have the lowercase h's. Now, this is actually a sex-linked trait. So she is carrying it. And so you can see in the family here, you see everyone that is shaded that has hemophilia, they are all squares, which are male. So all of these guys, they have the recessive trait. So this is very similar to red-green color blindness. It's a recessive trait. So if the guy gets just one copy of the recessive trait, he will display it, versus a female would need both copies. So red-green color blindness and hemophilia, they're both X-linked and recessive. And this is an example of a royal family where that trait was passed on throughout many generations. All right, so as part of pedigrees on your test, you will do some analysis with those. All right, so here we have a pedigree for red-green color blindness, which is an X-linked recessive trait, meaning it's found on the X chromosome and it's a recessive trait. So the first question is, how many of 1-1 and 1-2, their children are carriers? Well, first of all, let's identify 1-1 and 1-2. So that would be these two guys here. They're in the first generation. Okay, here's 1-1 and 1-2. So this question is asking about their children. So you want to kind of trace those lines that connect them to their children, okay? Because these guys right here, that means that they just either married or had children with their children, okay? So they're not part of the family, like in terms of like blood. So out of the children that I'm connected to, it looks like only 2 of them are carriers. So 2 of them are carriers, and to identify them, we would say 2-2, Roman numeral, and 2-4. Both of them would be carriers. So 2 of them, and that's how I would identify them. The next question is asking which grandchildren of same couple we're talking about here are colorblind, okay? Well, we just traced all of their children, right? So it's asking about their grandchildren. So if these are their children, we have to look at their children's children, which would be their grandchildren. So let's see. So out of their kids, these guys had children, and then this guy had children. So it looks like for 1-1 and 1-2, 2 of their children had children. And out of those children, the ones that are colorblind would be fully shaded. So that would be 2, or generation 3, because now we're in generation 3-4 and 3-5. Those 2 would be colorblind because they are fully shaded. Last question is asking about the relationship between 3-5, so this colorblind guy here, and 4-5, which is this guy right here. Well, if we trace it, 4-5, here is his mom. She's right here. And that would be the mom's brother. So this would be uncle and nephew. Okay? Because this guy right here, this guy is his mom's brother. And that's how we analyze a pedigree. So for your homework, okay, you have 2 pedigrees here. So here's another one for color blindness, red-green color blindness. And then this one up here is actually for Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease, it's actually not sex-linked, it's autosomal. So it's not found on the sex chromosomes. Now, one thing that you're going to notice for question number 4 here, it says there's no carriers in this. There's no one that's half shaded. So since nobody's half shaded, that means that nobody's carrying the recessive. So therefore, this has to be a dominant trait. Like you have it or you don't. There's nobody that can be carrying a recessive, and that capital letter would be overshadowing it. So for question number 5, the only way to not have this disease would be recessive. So anyone that is unshaded would be recessive because they don't have the disease. But everyone that's shaded would have at least one capital letter. And you can find out what the other letter is based on the pattern of inheritance in this family.